When people originally asked me what I wanted out of Sage, I said I wanted White Mage, but with shields. I didn't want a gimmick to buff the party, I didn't want a pet mechanic, I wanted a job that would let me focus on my performance, and oh boy did SE deliver. Hey there Eorzeans, we got some very interesting information regarding healers, and in this video we're going to focus on Sage. But if you're interested in the changes coming to the other healers, be sure to subscribe because we'll be covering them all. So if I were to describe Sage in one sentence, I would say it was a stance-dancing, DPS-focused healer that utilizes damage reduction, shields, and regens to maintain the party through various OGCDs. Now, I want you to note that I mentioned DPS, and we're going to discuss that and its implications. But first, let's talk about the job actions trailer. This is the first time we got to see Sage during the live letter, and not only did we get to see it in action, but we got to see its job gauge. The job gauge is beautiful, it's well designed, it's clean, and overall pretty intuitive. Let's start by looking at the square up top. Based off of the gameplay and what was said in the live letter, this is our stance indicator. Now, I'm calling it a stance, but it's not really a stance. It only affects spells cast directly after it. Once it's cast, you revert back to normal. It may sound a bit complicated, but at the end of the day, Eucrasia will modify DPS and healing spells to create different outcomes. For example, if Eucrasia is active, the single target spell Dosis becomes damage over time. If active when casting Prognosis, an AoE heal, or Diagnosis, a single target heal, it adds a shield to the heal. The outcomes aren't the only thing Eucrasia affects. Looking at the tooltips, we can also see that the spells become instant, but cost a little more MP, so use Eucrasia wisely. If you're worried about having to memorize the alternate spell effect for each spell under the influence of Eucrasia, these are the only 3 spells that Eucrasia can currently affect based off the translations and the visual indicators on the HUD during the live letter. Speaking of visual indicators, you can tell Eucrasia is activated based on whether or not that blue square is active on your HUD. And that brings us back to our Sage gauge. Let's drop down and take a look at that beautiful blue bar and the matching indicators above it. This part of the job gauge is going to feel real familiar for my white mages out there. It's essentially your lily bar. The horizontal bar fills over time, and the blue orbs above it indicate your stored charges, just like your lilies. Every time the bar fills to completion, you'll gain a charge, or an Adder's Gall, maxing out at 3. What this means is that, similar to lilies, you'll want to make sure you use them in a timely manner as not to lose out on charges. Luckily, based off the translated tooltip, it looks like these charges will be the currency for your more powerful heals, so I don't see finding ways to use them being a problem. While this mechanic shares a lot with White Mage lilies, they differ in a very important way. These charges are off-global cooldown abilities, meaning you'll weave them in to spend them more akin to Scholar's Aether Flows. In fact, some of these abilities should look and feel incredibly familiar to their Aether Flow counterparts. Duracall is an instant 600 potency cure, essentially Lustrate. Curacall is a bubble mechanic that offers 10% party damage reduction and a 15-second 100 potency regen, kind of like a blue version of Sacred Soil. Exicall is a 400 potency instant group heal and the mirror image to Scholar's Indomitability. Where they differ is their last ability, Turacall. Turo is basically Lustrate with an additional 10% damage reduction on a single target. Be advised though, Turacall will not stack damage reductions with Caracall, so save your charges and use those Taros for your tank busters. Another thing to note about your Adder's Gall is that it looks like it may be the only way to recover MP outside of lucid dreaming, or at least it's the only thing I saw in the live letter that indicated it. But we didn't see everything, and we'll know more after the media tour. Keeping with our adder theme, let's talk about those purple diamonds, otherwise known as the Adder's Sting. Now, I'm not 100% on exactly how this is accumulated. I've seen people say it's when someone equipped with your shield gets hit, I've seen people say it's when the shield breaks. Either way, we'll definitely know for sure after the media tour, so for now let's talk about what happens when you use it. Using a Sting casts Toxicon, Sage's signature AoE DPS move with all the lasers. Judging by the indicators on the gauge, you can have up to 3 charges of Toxicon stored, and if we're assuming that the tooltips displayed are relatively accurate, Toxicon has a damage potency of around 330, making the 3 charges comparable to White Mage's Blood Lily attack and its 900 potency. Remember how earlier I teased about Sage being a DPS healer? This is where we're going to get into it. Specifically regarding the ability Cardia. Cardia functions similar to Dancer's closed position ability and grants a special beneficial connection between you and a designated party member of your choosing. And what I'm more interested in is the overall picture. And the overall picture is that Cardia Heal is activated through DPS spells. You need to do damage to make use of Cardia. Upon casting certain spells, your designated Cardia partner will receive a 170 potency heal. They intentionally made a green TPS, and I am all in. To my healers out there that don't like to DPS or aren't really comfortable with it, I'm so sorry, but I don't think you're going to enjoy this class. Now, I want to clarify, Sage does have ways to heal outside of Cardia Partner. Most of your healing is going to come from the Adder's Galls we discussed. But this is basically equivalent to your Scholar Fairy Embraces. It's an automatic heal that's not costing you any additional MP, and it'll be taken into consideration when it comes to your potencies and balancing. On top of that, it was one of the main bulleted points when discussing Sage, meaning that it's intended to be a main feature on the class, and that Sage is meant to DPS. Could you play Sage without making use of Cardia Partner and its healing effects? I'm sure you can, but it's not the spirit of the job, and I feel if you were to do that, you'd be intentionally missing a key part of your toolkit. All in all, a lot of Sage's abilities are borrowed bits and pieces from other classes within Final Fantasy XIV. What makes it fun and interesting is the application, and I'm really excited to dig into it. Once the embargo is lifted and content creators release more about the job, I'll be doing more videos on the different applications for the abilities. But for now, we're just gonna have to wait till October 13th. For Endwalker, I'm going to be maining White Mage and Sage, so for more tips, tricks, gameplay, and guides, be sure to like and subscribe. Before we close out this video, I want to give a huge thanks to my patrons over at Patreon. Your support means more than you know. So thank you Lawrence, Kaz, Matthew, JF0, Carlos, Pigeon, Siren, Krios, Alex, Hardcore Mike, and Kaori. Also a big thank you to the members of the forum. That's it for today's video. Take care, Yorzians. I'll see you next time.